Hey girls and gals, welcome back to my channel. My name is Taylor and today's video is going to be a weekly reading vlog with a little bit of a twist. So normally, very big mood reader, kind of read whatever, just depends on the week, depends on the day. I rarely set TBRs, and when I do, they're more of a thematic TBR than an actual list of books because I just can't stick to one. But I have been in such a Stephen King mood that he is pretty much all I want to read. So I'm going to honor that impulse and I'm going to read nothing but Stephen King for 1 week. He is one of my favorite authors. I suspect, like a lot of people who love horror, he was kind of my first introduction into the horror book genre. So definitely have a lot of love for Stephen King. I definitely feel like fall is prime Stephen King season. A lot of my favorite Stephen King books like have such an autumnal atmosphere, like Salem's Lot. So I figured I would just go ahead and read as many Stephen King books as I can in a week. Now, I am a Stephen King fangirl, but there are some books that I don't like of his. So definitely I have books that are like my favorite books of all time, and then I have books that are like 1 star I do not like from him. So definitely, hopefully there will be a little bit of variety in here. Even with my favorite authors, I'm definitely not someone who just kind of reads and then just says they're perfect without flaws. I think Stephen King is a wonderful, masterful storyteller, but I can acknowledge he's got like what, 80 plus books out now, so not all of them are gonna be for me, but I'm really hoping the ones that I've picked this week are, just because that would not be fun. I've been on a Stephen King high. The last 2 books that I read Fairy Tale, which I really loved, and then I reread 11/22/63 and I really enjoyed that as well. So yeah, I'm just in a Stephen King mood. I have some books that I would like to get to, but really it's just gonna be, as long as it's Stephen King, it's good to go. So I picked 4 books initially, a variety of genres. Stephen King has lots of genres, not just horror books, so there's a little bit of something for almost everybody, but I definitely wanted to pick some books with different tones, different kind of feels, so that I wouldn't be like reading the same exact thing over and over again. So I've got 4 books. So first off, I am hoping to read a short story collection, Full Dark, No Stars, and then I also would like to read a fantasy. So I'd like to read The Eyes of the Dragon before I dive into The Dark Tower, because they're not necessarily related, but I have heard that this feels kind of like the building blocks where you kind of start to see King get a lot of his ideas for The Dark Tower, and I haven't read that series yet. So I've got a fantasy on the list. And then I also picked one from like the very backlist of his collection, and then one that was kind of more recent. So I've got Revival. This one came out in 2014, and then I also have Christine, which is like kind of iconic. This came out in '83, so while I want to say both of these are horror, I feel like '83 Stephen King and 2014 Stephen King are gonna feel just a little bit different. So this is my tentative TBR. Of course, you know, I might not read all of these, I might read all of these. I'm gonna try and read more than these. I've been in like such a voracious reading mood recently. I've been reading so much more than I usually have. So yes, let's just go ahead and start the vlog. Today is Saturday, October 15th. So we're gonna go from Saturday to Saturday and we will see how many Stephen King books that I can read in a week. So it is now Monday. I had a bit of a slow start to this vlog over the weekend. I didn't end up reading too much, but I did start my first book, and that would be Revival. I did take the dust jacket off. I usually take them off. But I am on page 200, which is pretty much 50% of the way through this one. I feel pretty confident that I can finish this one today. At the very least, if I don't finish it tonight, I'll make a lot of headway in it tonight, just because honestly, this was not anything like what I was anticipating. I didn't know much about it, and the beginning got me a little nervous, but then the way that it's going is very, very intriguing. I will say, first of all, this is a slow burner. There's a lot of character building, character development, and kind of setup for the story that may or may not be altogether that necessary, but I did enjoy the character building, so I would say at 35 to 40% is where we're really getting into the meat of the story for this one. But we are following Jamie, and we follow him and his encounters with his childhood preacher. So the book starts with Jamie's a very young boy. The community's preacher is very well loved by the community that Jamie's in. Jamie idolizes him, his siblings idolize him. Tragedy strikes the preacher, and he ends up moving away, and Jamie thinks this is the last time he'll ever see this preacher. But several years down the road, when Jamie's about 30, he encounters this preacher again, and even though Jamie thought both him and the preacher had renounced their faith after the preacher's tragedy from so long ago, the preacher may be conducting experiments with electricity and proclaiming that he has some miracle work up his sleeve. So I feel like I can kind of sort of sense where this is going, especially because this book is dedicated to Mary Shelley, among many other horror greats like Bram Stoker, H.P. Lovecraft, Shirley Jackson. So I'm kind of feeling maybe a little bit of where this is going to go, but I'm very intrigued. Again, this one's only like 400 pages. I don't know why I kept thinking it was a little bit longer than that, but I say only 400 pages. I feel like 400's not too thick when it comes to a Stephen King novel, so hopefully I will finish this tonight to give my final thoughts on it tomorrow. I'm gonna go get to reading, and I will talk to you all later. So it is now Wednesday, and I have finished 2 books. I wanted to give a little disclaimer because usually I've noticed my Stephen King videos get a little more traction, a little more views than my normal videos. So I do want to like give a disclaimer on how I am able to read so much, just because I'm a fast reader. I've always been a fast reader. I read a lot of books per week. So while I am challenging myself to just read Stephen King this week, I'm not like pushing myself to read more than I normally would, if that makes sense. So I do read physical books, and then also like the audiobook. I've gotten audiobooks of all of these from my library, so they're free, and I've been listening to them in tandem. So I'll read, and and then I have a commute to and from work. I'll listen to an audiobook. Do have a lunch break at work. I normally read during my lunch break because it's just 30 minutes and you really can't do anything too much with 30 minutes. I am able to listen to audiobooks at times of the day as well as I'm working, so I do read a lot per day, but I am done with 2 books, so let's talk about them. Revival, very shiny cover. I did enjoy this one. I was pleasantly surprised. This is definitely a character-driven, slower-paced book. I will say I thought the ending was one of King's better endings, but I thought it was too short. I wish it would have been drawn out more, especially with the amount of slow character development and slow building up. The ending just felt like it was there and it was gone. But I did enjoy my time reading this one, and yeah, I did like the little elements, little Easter eggs in there. Definitely, I think the biggest thing is the climax of this novel. I wish it just would have been like fleshed out a little bit more, but I did enjoy my reading time of this overall. And then after that, I picked up The Eyes of the Dragon. I didn't have an update for this while I was reading it because I just didn't really have anything to say. This was okay. First things first, the title and the cover of this book suggests I feel like that dragons would play a much bigger role in this than it does. Stephen King wrote this in large part for his daughter so that she would have a non-horror story from him to read, and this is, I would say it definitely feels very YA, almost middle grade at times. It definitely has like a younger tone to it. It's a pretty standard fantasy. We do have a king named Roland and an evil magician named Flag in here, so thought that was interesting. Very standard medieval England-ish sort of world building, and we're following this one royal family and a contention over succession to the throne. It was good. I'm glad I read it, and there are lots of gorgeous full-page illustrations, at least in the copy that I have, so I did enjoy reading it. Just don't have a lot of thoughts to say about it. It was okay. Yeah, I definitely would not recommend this as a book if it's your first book with Stephen King, but yeah, it was fine. I'm not really a big fan of like fairy tale sort of books, like books that feel like they're fairy tales, like with a narrator that's kind of talking to you. I don't tend to enjoy that sort of fairy tale, so not my favorite, but I didn't really have any glaring problems that I didn't like about it, so probably a little bit forgettable for me ultimately, but it was a fairly short read. And I do think for my next book I'm gonna switch things up a little bit, and I did read 2 novels, so I'm going to switch to a short story collection. This is Full Dark, No Stars, and the contents are 1922, Big Driver, Fair Extension, and A Good Marriage. The only one that I've heard of is 1922. I'm pretty sure that has a Netflix adaptation, so I might watch that after I read it, but I figured 2 full-length novels, go ahead and dive into this short story collection next. So that's what I'm gonna read. So it is now Friday and I have finished 3 of the 4 stories in this collection, and I'll probably, I would say, finish the 4th one today as well. It's 12:30 in the afternoon right now. It is Friday, I think I already said that, but I had a half day at work today because I worked regular office hours for half a day, and then later on tonight I'm going back, I work at a library, I'm going back to help out with the program, so that counts for work time. So only half a day of working traditional hours. So yeah, I have a whole afternoon. I think I'll be able to read the last story. My bookmark's right where the last story starts, so I think that's definitely doable for me. Short story collections often can be kind of hard to rate just because often they're a mixed bag, and there are some that are good, some that are not so good. This one, there's only 4 stories, so honestly, it'll probably be a little bit easier for me to decide my opinion on the whole collection as a whole. But for right now, I'll say 1922. I am very eagerly anticipating seeing the movie because I did think it dragged a little bit for a short story, and I'm really interested to see like what a movie adaptation would do, because I do think it's a very internal story. So it's a story about a man who convinces his son to help him murder his wife so they can stay on their property and they don't have to leave in 1922. So the story starts there and goes on. So while there is action, it is very internal as our main character is kind of grappling with his decisions. So I'm interested to see how that would translate into a movie. The second story, Big Driver, was harder for me to read. I would say out of everything that I've read this week, it took me the longest, just in terms of how many pages Big Driver had versus how long it took me to finish, just because it was really, really hard to read. So it's about this woman who is driving home from work one day. Her car breaks down and she gets raped by a stranger, and then it follows her in the aftermath of that and trying to figure out how she can kind of reclaim herself and reclaim the kind of justice that she wants. So definitely big trigger warnings. I would say any sort of sexual violence, if that is a trigger for you, if that's kind of a iffy area for you, I would skip it. It's very graphic, very brutal. I do think it was done pretty well in terms of Tess being a main character that you do really want to root for. That apparently it has also been adapted for TV, so there is like a movie adaptation somewhere. I'm not going to watch it. It was like incredibly hard to read, and I don't want to watch and visualize that even more. But I thought the thought process that Tess goes through, kind of dealing with her shame at something that happened to her that was not her fault at all, but kind of dealing with societal repercussions of that, as well as trying to figure out how she can move forward. Again, another very internal story. I think it might be shorter than 1922, but I thought so far it's my favorite in the collection. I hesitate to say that because I did not enjoy reading it one bit. It was really hard to read just due to the nature of the story, but obviously it was very hard hitting. Definitely one where I do think it's written technically well. I'll never revisit it because it was hard. And then the third one, Fair Extension, that's the shortest of all of these. I thought it was okay. It's very much like a story that we've seen before, even a story that I feel like I've seen from King before, done in like a not better way, because there's nothing technically wrong with the story, but it's not like a very fulfilling sort of tale. I think ultimately it'll probably be pretty forgettable. Like if I'm thinking about the story collection, I'm probably not going to think of that story anytime first. So it's about a man who has cancer. He meets a mysterious figure on the side of the road, makes a deal he thinks is too good to be true, thinks the man is a little bit off his rocker, doesn't expect anything from it, but when he gets home he realizes his cancer has gone and he might have made a deal with something that is going to take back from him sometime. Again, very short. I think this is the only one in this collection that I can see, at least from the back of this, at the time that I'm filming, hasn't been adapted, which I can see why. Again, it's very short. I again kind of switched back and forth between the physical and the audiobook. The audiobook isn't like bad to listen to. It's an enjoyable read. Definitely did not take me as long as the other two because it's just a shorter story, but it was okay. Definitely the weakest one of this collection, I would say, because again, I feel like that sort of Faustian bargain is something that happens a lot in fiction, happens a lot in horror fiction. I've just read it so many times by this point, and even from Stephen King, similar stories that kind of deal with that premise, that just do it a little bit better. So yeah, last story is A Good Marriage, so looking forward to finishing that today. Now, when I go to this event to kind of help out, I'm kind of just there as like a body. So it's like a drive-in movie theater. So we're doing kind of like an impromptu drive-in sort of deal. So patrons can drive their cars up and watch a movie that we've set up in our parking lot. The library is going to be closed, but I'm pretty much just going to be there like as an usher almost. So the library will be limited open with like bathrooms for people, and I think I'm just sitting there and making sure no one goes through the library except to go to the bathroom and help out in any way needed. So I did download an ebook on Libby to read on my phone while I'm there if I have a spare moment, and I also found the audiobook on Libby as well as I do have a physical copy as well. So I think I'm going to pick up Lisey's story tonight. I still do want to get to Christine. I've been really meaning to read that book in particular for a while, but I think just because I found this one in so many formats that were just ready for me to check out at my library, I'll probably start this one tonight, potentially. Depends on, I haven't helped out at an event like this before at my job, so from my understanding, it's not going to be too involved. I'll have some downtime to kind of read, but if not, then I won't start anything. So this I may or may not be starting tonight, but yeah, that's the update. I'm gonna go make some lunch, finish the last short story in the collection, and I will talk to you all later. So it is Saturday, the final day of the vlog, and last night I didn't really get as much reading done as I thought I would. So I did manage to finish the last short story, In Full Dark, No Stars. I thought it was a pretty solid collection. Definitely not one that I would say would be my favorite short story collection or even like a particularly memorable one. I would say maybe it would be a good introduction to Stephen King's writing, because I did think it was like a very solid collection. There were none in there that I thought were awful. I thought they were all really consistent quality. So yeah, I did finish that before I had to go and work that event. And that event kind of went a little differently than I thought, because after we had finished setting up for the drive-in movie, the screen was a large blow-up screen, and normally it works just fine. But last night was like apparently super windy, even though it didn't feel that windy. So we actually had to kind of hold it in the back a little bit for like the last 30 minutes of the movie. So I did not get to read as much as I thought I was going to, which turned out being okay, because I decided that I just was not in the mood for Lisey's story. I thought I would be. No, I'll probably explore that one at a later time, but I did go ahead and pick up Christine last night, been reading it this morning as well. Honestly, I'm like about 40 to 50% of the way through, so fingers crossed I'll probably be able to get it done by the end of today, and I'm enjoying it. It's very much got that old school Stephen King style, a little bit dated, obviously. This came out in 1983, but it definitely feels, even though the book is set in 78 and 79, definitely feels like a kind of fun, slightly corny 80s horror premise about a car named Christine. That's a little bit sinister, so I am enjoying it. I do have the audiobook, so I'm flipping back and forth between the audiobook, like I listened to that when I was on the treadmill this morning, and then reading it physically as well, and I am having a really good time with it. So hopefully I'll be able to finish this last final book of the vlog today, and I will check back in with you when I'm done with it. Alright, it is now time for the end of the vlog. I did manage to finish Christine, and let me just say, I unintentionally saved the best for last, I think, because I really enjoyed this. I really enjoyed this so much more than I thought I would. Like, this is the back author photo, which I just think is just fantastic. It says Stephen King and friend. So I know Stephen King is really into cars, really into motorcycles. He's a car guy, which is totally fine. I, however, am not. I'm not a car person. I don't really care. So I was really concerned picking up a horror about a car written by a car person, because I know Stephen King's description. I know his love of mundane, everyday explanations and character work, and I was just worried this was going to be a whole lot of car stuff that I wouldn't really care about. However, this really worked for me, and honestly might be in my top 10 Stephen Kings. I'm not even kidding. I was not expecting that at all. I will say, even though this book itself is set in 78, 79, it definitely feels, with the premise of this haunted car that may or may not have a life of its own, the premise is just so like fun 80s movie, 80s horror type of vibes. It's just like such a quintessentially Stephen King setup, and that was really fun. Obviously the setup and the horror in here is not as hokey as I'm making it sound, but just like, you know, 80s, if you watch a lot of 80s horror now, it just has like this charming vibe, and that's really what this had. It did have some really genuinely horrific moments, and I did go back and forth listening to the audiobook and then reading my physical copy. Yeah, I just have a lot of good things to say about it. The character work was good. You know, our main character, well, it's interesting because this is split up into 3 parts. Parts 1 and parts 3 are first person narration, and Dennis, our main character, is recounting these events, and then the second part of this is third person narration, and it kind of dives into some scenes that obviously Dennis wouldn't have been there for. So we're following Dennis and Lee and Arnie, and those are the 3 main characters, and just the high school dynamics, the high school friendships and relationships dynamics, I just thought were just so wonderful, and definitely like raised the stakes, and you could see through the characterization work why things escalated the way that they did, why it was really hard to try and stop these things from happening, and to kind of have this go the way that it does. I think it was a solid ending. Yeah, I really love this, and I'm really excited that I love it because I feel like a lot of, I'm noticing really iconic Stephen King works, I'm not that much of a fan of. Like, I did not like The Stand, which I think is probably the most controversial opinion that I have, and I'm also nervous to read the Dark Tower series because I'm worried I won't like it, but I really loved this, and I think it's my top 10. Now obviously there never needs to be like any point to reading. Reading is just for fun. I did have a lot of fun just reading Stephen King books this whole entire week. So really looking at like all the books that I read together, that's a really good amount of pages. Feeling good about that. I definitely, these two I would have read sooner rather than later. I gravitate towards Stephen King's full-length works the most, I would say. I will say this one, I probably wouldn't have read as soon had it not been for this challenge I put upon myself, because it just was never one that really like struck out to me as one that I would like, and I did think it was just okay, but I am glad that I read it. And then I, embarrassingly enough to say, I just like never am gravitated towards short story collections, so I'm glad that I picked one up. I know Stephen King has a reputation for being overly wordy, having these huge tomes, but I do think he's really good at the short story, so I'm glad that I picked up this collection, because definitely when I feel like picking up a Stephen King, I never gravitate towards the short story collections first as much as I should. So yeah, I had a really good reading week. I would say probably my least favorite just was Eyes of the Dragon. I'm moving away from YA. This felt the most YA, and I do also read a lot of fantasy, so this just didn't really do anything groundbreaking in terms of fantasy, but it was enjoyable and pretty short, so I'm glad I read it. Next up, I would say Full Dark No Stars. For very solid stories, obviously kind of a mixed bag with all short story collections. Obviously I don't think there's any short story collection I've ever read where I've enjoyed all the short stories equally, but I thought 1922 especially was very stellar. The first two I would say in here, probably Big Driver and 1922 were the stronger ones in here. I do think a collection like this will be a good gateway point to try Stephen King, just because it's not that much of a page commitment, and you can really see his writing style. So I'd probably say 1922 would be a really good short story to pick up to kind of see. It does have like a creeping, very slow horror and lots of characterization, so I did enjoy reading this. My next favorite book I read this week was Revival, and this one I just felt like there were some missteps. There were some places where I wished it would have been fleshed out. I felt like the buildup was a lot longer than the actual conflict, and then I did feel while the conclusion, the ending itself was good, it was a little rushed, so I would have enjoyed that being expanded upon more. But I did really enjoy reading this one. I'm glad I did. Definitely, I think this came out the same year as Mr. Mercedes, or really close to it, and I definitely like this one a whole lot more than I like Mr. Mercedes. So that would be my second favorite book of the week. And then my favorite book of the week, saving the best for last, Christine. Just a classic. I just really loved it. If you're a person like me who's like, I'm not a car person and I don't see really how a car could be that scary, I will say, if you don't see how a car could be that scary, I'd say still give it a try. Definitely very interesting, very classic vintage Stephen King, and I just had a whole lot of fun reading this one. So all in all, I had a really good reading week. I had a lot of fun. Definitely, I think this is probably the only author I could do this for, so you know, I might do this again sometime if I'm ever in the mood to read just 1 week of an author's work. But I had a lot of fun, and I hope you did too. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, leave a comment down below, subscribe to my channel for more content from me. Stay safe, stay spooky, and I'll see y'all in the next one. Bye!